Hey, true believers. Chris Mack coming at you today with Punchline number 1. Now, I've been biting at the bit for this comic book to come out. I really wanted to know more about her because we only got glimpses of the type of person that she is through the Prelude and the Joker War and the, Year of the Villain, Hell Arisen issue. And so I wanted to know more about her because she ended up being a really interesting character. Now, with this book, I was hoping that we were going to get more. So you do get her backstory. Cool. But, like, the main story itself is kind of eh. So, to put it in context, this takes place after the Joker War, which we are slowly working through. I got a backlog, doing my best. But you don't need to finish the Joker War per se. Tinian does a good job here of kind of, if you just want to jump into this one, you don't need to know everything that happened in the Joker War. It gives you some glimpses. So, spoilers will abound. And also just this Frank Cho variant. I love his work. He always does such wonderful, wonderful pieces like this. So anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and dive into Punchline. And so it kind of starts out interesting. He says, years ago, and she goes, I never sought him out. I was still a normal kid. I did everything a normal kid does. I went to school. I got good grades. Good enough that they didn't turn any heads. And sometimes I went on field trips. And so they're at a Gotham news station, which, my profession, this guy says, all right, seniors, who's ready to see where we record the news? You don't normally record the news. Anyway. But I like how it does have an interesting setup here. It goes, well, look what we have here. And so this being Gotham, of course, you can never have a normal Tuesday, as they would say. Sorry, I'm trying to hold the book down because it keeps wanting to slide. So it at least kind of sets you up with an interesting backstory here. And you're like, okay, this is rough. But then, she says to herself, I still think of myself as a normal kid. Just one who got dragged into the into a world too violent to escape from. So as you read that, you're kind of like, okay, so she's a victim of happenstance, or circumstance, should I say. And you're like, okay, interesting. But then it's like, things progress. So, this right here takes place after the Joker War, which I don't want to spoil too much of. They're talking about life sentences, yada, yada, yada. But what's interesting is the way she talks, she sounds like any normal young adult. She's like, I'm aware. Well, maybe a little bit older, should I say, because she doesn't use, the words such as like and, oh my gosh, that's so funny. She's just very to the point. So like a sophisticated young person. How about that? She goes, I'm aware. She's talking about the charges that are against her. But then you get moments like this, where she goes, because I'm innocent. And that's an interesting panel right there, the way she just kind of looks down and whatnot. This book does not want to stay. It's driving me nuts. So I kind of like that. It shows this duality side of her. Now, before we go any further into it, I think I jumped over the credits. I did. So this is aptly called Center Stage. Written by James Tynion IV and Sam Johns. Art by Mika Andolfo, if I'm saying that wrong, I'm sorry. Colors by Romulo Fajardo Jr. Colors by Gabrielle Downey. Covers by Yosemite Paturi. And then, of course, the variant cover by Frank Cho and Sebastian Rich. And there's another variant, blah, 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 variant. And, of course, Batman was created by Bill Finger with Bob Kane. Now, with that out of the way. In terms of Bat characters, it focuses on Harper, who is Bluebird. If you guys aren't sure who she is, go back and read Snyder's New 52 Batman run. I think it was after 0 year they introduced Harper and her brother Blaine, I think his name is. But it's interesting seeing Leslie Tompkins with colored hair, like brown hair, because you're used to her always being more of an older lady, both from the original Batman comics, the Volume 1 that kind of ran for years and years before they rebooted it in Flashpoint, and of course Batman the Animated Series. So, kind of interesting to see her as a younger woman. Now she's being hauled off to jail Now there's something that happens that allows her to get online. You find out that she's very social media and kind of tech savvy. And a lot of the smiles that she does, they remind me of like anime villains, where you'll see a girl, like specifically what kind of reminds me of is Dead Man's Wonderland, which if you haven't read that manga or seen the, what is that called? The manga is the book. Oh god, anime, thank you. I was sitting there drawing a blank. A lot of times they'll show like a girl who seems innocent, and then you'll kind of get a close look of this, so that very much adds to the tension of the book. And again, you see that smile, and then you see the other side of her and how she's very much able to play on the heartstrings of people. So that's an interesting character to me. Now, let's break this up into 3 parts. First part here, the build up of how she kind of was first introduced to the Joker, to the trial after the Joker Wars. Interesting. Now we focus on Bluebird, which I like how they kind of segue from how she uploads this thing talking about how she's not guilty, yada, yada, yada. And then we see it on a broken screen showing that she's taken over broadcast in Gotham. Now we focus on Harper and her brother, Blaine. Now, that's kind of cool. I liked Bluebird when they first introduced her, then she just kind of disappeared. But I kind of feel like the book gets derailed because it's like sitting and standing and talking. More talking. Then you're like, okay, well, maybe some action will happen. Maybe we'll see Bluebird go out on patrol. Maybe see her kick some butt, try and find out more about Punchline, right? More flat panels. And now we're gaming and talking. Which, okay, in order to kind of get to where we need to be, Blaine finds someone online that DMs him and says, hey, now that Punchline's out in the open, people have found her old podcast, which kind of dates the book. Because you're like, oh, podcasts. I guess you could have said, I don't know. Podcast to me, I think like the early 2000s before YouTube, yada, yada, yada. But I guess it could be the same thing. Whatever. So you see she has like the hunt for Joker, hunt for, Ace Chemicals, the Reservoir, the Chuckle Hut, blah, 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 blah. And then Amusement Mile is one of the last ones. And here's where this is where the book for me gets a little boring, because she goes back and she kind of talks about, like in the New 52, Batman and Joker's first encounter at the Reservoir. And she's talking about how she wants to understand him more. How she wants to get records from Arkham. So you find glimpse of interestingness in it. But oh my goodness, talk. I mean, look at that. This is what I was talking about in older books. Remember how I said in newer books they text dialogues a mile long? Text dialogues a mile long. Now the artwork's interesting. I love this kind of vanishing point perspective of pointing upwards, showing her looking up at the forebodingness and creepiness and dominance of Arkham, and how it's sort of a demanding thing in Gotham City, especially the Joker. And she really gets into that. I don't want to give away the dialogue. If you want to, I want you to read it. One thing I did find both interesting and frustrating at the same time. Okay. More talking. Now this goes back to the Jokerfish story way back. I don't remember what year it was, but it was like Detective Comics 475, I think it is, like 474 and 475, and how Joker poisoned the water system and made the Twisted Jokers and tried to trademark them. They also did it in Batman the Animated Series. I don't remember what the episode was called, but I think that was one of the ones where Harley was first introduced. So anyway, what's interesting about this panel is kind of the way Punchline talks about it and how he uses it as one of his sick jokes. And then here how the aquarium set up, how they save some of the Joker fish for the aquarium so people can kind of see what happens here. And then they put like these mannequins in this tank in loving memory of the victims, that were affected by the Joker fish. So it's kind of a haunting panel in my opinion. But again, we're talking about all these great Batman stories where, there was pacing, and it wasn't always like action, punching, bam, wham, pow. It was suspense. It was Batman trying to outthink the Joker and try to save all these lawyers that wouldn't patent Joker's Jokerfish. That was interesting. But here, okay, I like the panel. It kind of gives that empty Halloween feeling. Even talk about how the museum sells plushy Jokerfish. That's kind of creepy. And Punchline references that and how she says how even here, you know, Gotham makes money off of you, meaning the Joker. And then we get into Amusement Mile. And it's interesting how she talks about, I know I'm saying interesting a lot because that's all I can really say, because as you can see, it's just a whole bunch of flashbacks and dialogue. Flashbacks and dialogue. And Blaine, the brother, is kind of used as sort of like the sounding board, and since he's listening to her podcast, so there he is sitting, which is boring. But here, one thing I do want to reference, because she's like, I want to know what happened here at Amusement Mile, because she talks about how Gotham striked it from the map. And let's see if I can find it here. She says she was able to get the transcripts, but she said parts of it were redacted. Something about the police commissioner, Gordon. Another line about his daughter. It feels like pages are missing. I can't help but feel like the joke was too good that time. So here she's referencing the killing joke. So that's cool. That's neat. But it doesn't need to be mucked up in all of this dialogue. See, the panels, show don't tell. And then we get back to Blair and Harper talking. And then Punchline's going to close her podcast. And you're just kind of like, okay. Maybe the talking will stop. Maybe we can start getting some action and some suspense. Which, okay, second part, remember I said we're going to break this up into 3 parts. That middle part, talking about her backstory, interesting tidbits, yes. It kind of it shows how the difference of Punchline and Harley, as where Harley was the doctor at Arkham, and in trying to analyze the Joker, it kind of broke her down and unleashed a dark side of her. And that's what made her interesting. Punchline, on the other hand, she didn't want nothing to do with the Joker, and she basically says the Joker, in a sense, kind of sought her out. And that's a whole another thing. And she said about how you can't overanalyze a joke. That's still being told without stripping out the humor, meaning all the stuff the Joker has done is not his final thing. Now this is where I started to get my ears started and my eyes started to perk back up in the book, because then we see these little panels, and she goes, "But you won't get the joke until you hear the punchline." So you see this courier dropping off all these letters, and we're starting to see all the Joker gas. And you see that she's kind of doing the same thing to homeless people. And she's talking about how she's part of Joker's grand scheme now and how she sees it. And, of course, again, you get back into how she's part of the madness. Love this panel here where she just, no remorse and just this gleefulness as she guts or slits this guy's throat. Yes, it's disturbing. It's scary. I don't condone it. But in terms of storytelling, you know, you have to have good villains. And so that's an interesting panel. You're just kind of like, oh, good grief. And of course, you have to kind of reference Alex Ross's Harley Quinn #1, where Joker embraces her because he finally seeks her out because she's trying to get his attention, because she says, I was never able to recreate what happened at the news station when I was a kid. But it's sort of this part right here. I don't want to give any of this away because I want you guys to read it, because you kind of see that she sees the Joker. You kind of see a panel here where she gets that wide-eyed craziness. This was a really interesting panel, and this one made me kind of like the book. And the last thing I will reference is how she's going to the courthouse to be tried, but you're seeing confetti. Why are you seeing confetti? Why is this interesting? What does this mean with the podcast? That's where I want you guys to pick up the book and read it. So yes, punchline #1. Slowed immensely down by large blocks of dialogue, as where it could have just been beats like old writers used to do, where you'd have a couple of boxes and then the panels spoke for themselves. I mean, there doesn't have to be explosions. Like, this doesn't have to be Michael Bay level. That's not what I'm saying when we need action. What I'm saying is when you get too much dialogue, it slows down the book, because then it begins to feel like a chore. If I want that much dialogue boxes, I'm going to read a novel. I'm going to go pick up Game of Thrones or Stephen King or something. In comics, yes, you want to read. But when you're so busy reading, you don't get to enjoy the artwork or how it visually, because this is a visual medium, and how it's supposed to tell the story through the panels. So that's where I got hung up on it. Overall, though, Tynion does a good job of setting up her backstory, so you get to know more about her and how she's like almost a, what am I trying to say? A 180 of Harley. Let's just leave it with that. I was trying to think of something more witty, but not enough coffee yet. But yeah, I would definitely still recommend reading this comic book because there are moments to love. Just if you notice yourself kind of starting to roar because of all the reading, put it down, walk away, grab a cup of coffee, what have you, and then come back and reread it when you're more focused and not feeling so bleh. So with that said, if you guys have enjoyed this review, please first and foremost support your local comic shop and see if you can get a copy of this, especially the Frank Cho variant, because it's so beautiful. And if you've enjoyed this review, we really would appreciate it if you take a moment to hit like, share, and subscribe. Helps the club channel more than you can possibly know. And if you wouldn't mind hitting that fancy little punchline bell next to subscribe, that way as we continue to upload content, you guys get notified. Come to the channel, and we'd love to hear your feedback and just talk with y'all down in the comments below or on our social media pages, which I'll make sure to leave the links down in the description below. So with all that said, thank you all so much for stopping by. I hope y'all continue to have an absolutely amazing day reading, and happy hunting, true believers.